Hello, hello. People are arriving into the webinar. Great to see so many people actually arriving so promptly. It's wonderful, wonderful to see you all here. I'll just give everybody just another few minutes for further people to actually enter in onto the webinar, and then we'll make a start. Hello, hello. People are arriving into the webinar. Great to Okay, well, I think we can make a start. So once again, welcome to the webinar, and I'm very, very grateful for so many people to have registered and to have turned up here today. It's an extremely wonderful experience to actually have you all here to listen to what we've got to say about immortality. So I'm going to run through this program here. We've got basically an introduction to the Immortality 5 pillars. So we're going to run through all of those. And in addition to that, we've got a couple of techniques that I'm going to show you. For some of you, these won't be brand new, but for others, they will be techniques that you haven't seen. And certainly, the first technique is a technique that nobody's seen previously, because it's of my own device, and I've kept it for this webinar, so it's going to be exciting to be able to share that with you. So basically, we're going to have a look at the question of why you'd want to live for a very long and very healthy life. And secondly, we're going to have a look at the question of how can I grow and maintain my relationships during that time. And obviously, not only do you want to be able to maintain your relationships or grow and maintain them, but the key factor for most people when the idea of living for a very long time is broached is how are we going to make sure that we're actually in peak physical performance and also peak emotional and mental performance. So many people on this call will know of the experience of family members or friends, or elderly parents of friends, or others that you've seen who have grown old and they've become very frail, either in their body or their mind, or perhaps in some cases both. So when that happens, it leaves you empty. It leaves you an awful empty feeling inside yourself, and you don't want that for yourself. And this becomes a huge issue. So what I'm finding with people when I'm doing this coaching work, with the immortality coaching work, is that one of the very first things that we need to address is how we're going to make sure that we are keeping good and sustainable and sustaining relationships, within your life for a very long period of time, and obviously the issue of maintaining that physical and mental and emotional health. So a little bit about me. On this call here, there are some people who don't know me particularly well, and others who do know an awful lot about my story. So I apologise for the people who know my story inside out, back to front. But for everybody else, we'll just go through a bit of a brief introduction of how I became interested really in this immortality project, and how I've come to actually develop these techniques that we are putting together in the coaching. So I've was brought up in an extraordinarily fortunate circumstances where my family were involved in all kinds of personal development and spiritual development, that type of thing. And so you'd have to say that it was a completely charmed existence that I grew up in. Wonderful family. I had 5 brothers and sisters who were living with me, and we had this particularly interesting sort of activities that my parents were involved in terms of helping other people with their personal development and so on. I was trained at a very early age in hypnotherapy by my father. He was a clinical hypnotherapist, and he also taught me many of the techniques which I have further developed on into these intuitive techniques. And I've developed a video series on that for relating to the environmental pressures that come onto your health and into your life. And of course, we're further developing those concepts and all those sorts of ideas with this immortality work quite significantly, in fact. I went on after I'd, in terms of the sort of work that we're talking about here, I continued doing the clinical hypnotherapy. I trained up in a variety of other therapies and counselling and those types of approaches. So in other words, talk approaches to health and to psychological well-being in particular, but more than anything about looking at personal development and the path that we can be taking towards a bigger goal and so on. I also had a number of business adventures, and they were adventures, and I certainly wish that some of them weren't quite so adventurous as they were. And one in particular went particularly wrong, and very, very wrong, in fact. And the stress and the strain of it was such that I ended up in a state of complete clinical depression. And the low point was when I found myself actually sleeping under a tree in a park in Rotterdam, and it was late autumn. It was not quite snowing, but it was certainly very heavy frost. And in fact, it was extremely miserable experience. And I was cold and I was hungry and I didn't have anywhere to go. And things were very, very difficult. I was very, very fortunate not long after that to actually come into the orbit of somebody who was working in this kind of field that I work in now in London. So I managed to get my way across to London, and I was staying with a young niece of mine who very kindly took me in and more or less nursed me, although at the time I wasn't actually admitting to anybody that I was in such a profound state of depression, but nonetheless I was. And so I was extremely interested in what this woman was doing with this consciousness work and how she was approaching it, particularly trying to actually manage these extremely fragile psychological conditions that I'd actually found myself in. Within a couple of sessions with this lady, and I'd actually had sufficient breakthroughs to actually then begin on the path of self-healing as well. And I decided there and then that I needed to learn how to do this. I thought I knew an awful lot with my counselling and hypnotherapy background, but the reality was that there's a whole new world of consciousness type of work which was available to us. So that was many, many years ago now, almost 10 years ago. And since then I've been training and working in this sort of consciousness health field, and coaching people and so on and so forth, and run a very successful clinic here in Perth, Western Australia, and we see clients for all manner of issues that they are facing. But it's all developing, and it's been developing steadily towards this immortality coaching process, which we're involved in at the moment. So part of that sort of, if you like, progression from general health work into the immortality coaching was that I commenced the research into the consciousness of healthy weight, which is a remarkable process that we've developed. And the consciousness of healthy weight turns out to be the hugest part of the equation that somebody's actually facing in terms of managing their body and their physical body and their weight and so on. Coming out of that research, I became aware of the fact that not only were we looking at just the processes around people becoming as healthy as possible in terms of their weight, but that every facet of their health and well-being were being touched upon. And coming out of that came the concept of the 7 Pillars of Immortality we're going to go on to today. So the question that many people ask is, why would I want to live for so long? And as I'm writing here, I'm just saying that the short answer is that that's actually not a very good question. So the question really wants to be, what are we going to do with all this extra time? And why that's the case is science is moving so fast at the moment that without any doubt we're going to live for very, very long periods of time. Very, very long periods of time. So at the present, providing you, live somewhere where you've got sufficient funds and access to, just normal health, facilities, medical facilities, that type of thing, food and shelter, and somebody to look after you if you're, struggling a bit. Well, 90 is pretty much what the expectation would be. So I'm not saying that this is the average age that people are passing away at, but 90 is certainly a reasonable expectation for people, as of today. With the developments that are going on with the current scientific research, right now they're beginning to grow organs, and it won't be very much time passed before we're going to be able to replace almost every organ in the body. And of course, if you're replacing entire organs, well, just replacing the odd bits of tissues here and there is a minor matter. So on that basis, we can look at the expectation rising from about 90 years to about 130 years. Well, that's an incredible extra length of time that people are going to be living, and it's just the beginning. So with the developments that are actually going on with science at the moment, it is a very conservative, very, very conservative estimate that within 20 years of today, that the reasonable expectation of life will be around 200 years. It'll be 200 years or more. And when you add on to that the types of development that we're doing with the work with consciousness and so on and so forth, well then effectively we're becoming immortal. And so I'm saying, and for all practical purposes, we're immortal. I'm not saying that a person isn't ever going to die, but from a practical perspective, we're going to be immortal. So physically immortal. So many people on the call here today, would definitely ascribe to the idea that we have an immortality, in any case, an immortality of the spirit. But what we're talking about here is a genuine physical immortality. So questions are, how are you going to manage this? So how will you manage the process of being so old? How will you cope? Do you have any choice, and could you opt out? So I've had this said to me many times by people recently. When I explain that we've got all these scientific changes and so on and so forth going on, they just say to me, I just wouldn't do it. There's no way I'm going to live for that long. And curiously, people will say that kind of thing, even without these scientific developments. And yet, when it comes, time that they are, beginning to decline and so on, we're talking about in the present context, people still are holding on to life, and there's no sense that you're going to opt out, and indeed, there's no option. From a legal perspective, there's no way that you can actually do an opt-out, and so if you can't avoid it and it's coming, the main question to ask yourself is, how can I optimize my future? And clearly you want to make it a life of complete joy and freedom. So if we compare and contrast that idea with the story that I told there at the beginning of me, sleeping under a tree in a park in Rotterdam, that is almost by definition the exact opposite of a life of joy and freedom. It's the absolute opposite from it. And, there's no doubt at all that the huge driver for me to do, to be doing this work is that I know that I actually have to come in to understand how it is that I'm actually going to have a life of absolute freedom and joy for myself. And of course, I'm wanting to be able to help as many other people as I possibly can as well. So, as I mentioned earlier, and it's in the title of the webinar, we're talking about the Pillars of Immortality. Somebody who's actually on the call at the moment, Darlene Willman, she's a wonderful coach, and she mentioned to me this idea of, well, what is the structure of it? I said to her, I was working with immortality. She said to me, what's the structure? And the first thing that popped into my mind was the idea that they were pillars and that there were 7 of them. And the way my wonderful intuitive mind works is that I get all these answers and then I have to find out what the reasoning is behind it. So it's not always obvious right from the outset. So we've been working with this concept of pillars, and the idea is that these pillars are all holding up the the actual process of immortality. And it's a wonderful picture there of these pillars from ancient Egypt. So the Pillars of Immortality, the 7 of them, and in this this webinar I'm going to just introduce them briefly to you. The follow-up series of webinars, which are there are a penny cost to them, but they're going to be coming available over the coming weeks. We'll be expanding upon each one of these, so it will be a full webinar on each of these 7 pillars. So the body's obvious enough, and clearly coming from a health background, there's no surprise to see that we've got the body in there. We've got the emotions, and everybody knows that the emotions have a big impact on how the body is operating. The emotions and the mind are always working together, of course. And then the environment is another massive issue here, and we're just going to explain a bit more about these things just in a moment. So I have a very broad definition of the term environment. Relationships, we were talking about there earlier, and I see it as being one of the key questions that are posed to me, is actually how are we going to have reasonable relationships if we're going to live for such a long time. And then the other one that people always come up with is, I could never afford it. How could I actually afford to be immortal? How could I afford to live for such a long period of time? And so that's a security issue. And then the last pillar is the pillar of purpose. And in many perspectives, you could actually put purpose right at the very beginning. So purpose could easily be considered to be the most important, or certainly the first pillar that should be considered, even though they all are actually as important as one another. So yeah, so the key thing here is that we need to make sure that we're actually balancing all of these things. So they need to be considered, and balance is the key. That balance is absolutely the word. So the main aspects within the body are obviously the physiology and the anatomy, so the actual the physical workings of it, so all the systems of the body, and then the actual anatomical structures. And when we're doing that with the coaching work that we're doing, obviously my approach to the immortality coaching is a mixture of both, pure health work that's done from a consciousness perspective, and in addition to that, it's the actual counselling aspect of the coaching process as well. So things around nutrition and the physical fitness, so the activity, strength, and flexibility issues are very key things to how the body is operating. And I have a number of very good friends who are nutritionists, and they found it very challenging that when I wrote my book, I said how you could trim your weight without changing your diet or your exercise. And I stand by that it's not necessary to actually change your diet or exercise to obtain a healthy weight, but to become ultimately healthy, you do need to look after your nutrition. You do need to look after the structure of your body. You need to make sure that you're maintaining your flexibility and your strength, and that you're keeping your activity levels up. So I hope that is understandable. I'm certainly not dismissing those issues. They're very, very important, key issues. So the emotions, many people on the call here tonight or today or this afternoon or morning, wherever you are in the world watching this, for many people, you're familiar with the processes around emotional release and managing your emotions and stress and so on. And I think almost everybody today, even the most staid scientists, understand that emotions have an incredible impact on the functioning of our body. So both on the systems, but also on the physical structure. So we're talking about the anatomical parts of the body as well. And indeed, stress is the #1 causative element of most disease. So when we look at almost any disease that a person may be suffering from, stress will be in there as one of the major causative elements in it. And on the other side of it, of course, is that positive emotions have a definite and dramatic positive influence on every aspect of our bodies. So a huge opportunity for us with the immortality coaching is to actually work with the negative emotions to release them and manage them and get them into a situation where they're actually usable. And on the other side of it is to bring about the types of changes which will allow the positive emotions to really thrive and develop. And this is a really key element of the coaching program is actually working around these positive emotions. The mind, here we're talking really about the intellect, but we're also talking about the mind on a number of levels. So, everybody's familiar with the idea of a conscious mind, and everybody's familiar with the idea of a subconscious or an unconscious, aspect to it. And with the work that we're doing with the immortality coaching and the health work, we recognise that the mind actually operates, right down to the level of the cell. So, in a way, we're not saying that a single cell has the complexity of thought that we have as a collective individual as we are. But nonetheless, the cell is capable of conscious decision-making processes and thought. So obviously, there's a big relationship between the mind and the emotions, and it's really key for us to to be able to get the thoughts and the memories and the belief systems consistent with the new patterns of positive emotions that we're developing. So in the coaching, we're working with these memories and beliefs and behaviours, and making sure that they are becoming more and more in sync and more collected with the positive emotions. So, and obviously, the last point there, the conflicts occurring below the radar and the subconscious, they're the things that actually express themselves as poor functioning within the body. So in the clinical work that we're doing here, the health work that we're doing, every day we're seeing people who have either structural or system-based issues within their body that are related to conflicts within the mind. Not a day goes past where it's not the case. As I was mentioning earlier, the environment is a very wide topic for me, how I actually view these things. And in terms of the coaching, we're looking at the environment in great detail. And one of the major environmental factors is actually what we're eating, and what we're eating, drinking, all of the other things that are coming in to us in terms of radiation, huge electrical fields, all those kinds of things are part of the environment and have a big effect on how our bodies are working, and indeed how the psychology is actually working as well. So these environmental factors can have a huge impact on how your emotional well-being as well as your mental well-being. So a good example of that actually is the disease that I was mentioning that I suffered from, which is depression. And it's well documented today that part of the formation of depression, other than the sorts of mad things that I got up to, which led to so much stress that I ended up plunging into depression. But generally speaking, for people, what you're eating can have a tremendous effect on how your brain is actually responding to it, and obviously depression is a disease of the brain. The plants and animals around us obviously fit into that as well. So relationships, we talked about that a little bit earlier, and as I say, no man is an island, and we badly need to have interactions with one another. And the fears that people have that they're going to age on their own, and the trauma that exists when you actually go into an old people's home or something like that, and you see all the people who are lonely and on their own and longing for their bereaved partners. There's nothing more tragic than this whole separation that goes on around what's happening with our relationships as we age. And the obvious answer is that, or the antidote to this is to improve your relationship with yourself, so that you point where you have a wonderful caring relationship with yourself, and you're actually able to live with yourself for a very long period of time. Obviously, with this advances in the medical work that we're talking about, we're going to see tremendous improvements and changes over a period of time, for both yourself and whoever it is that you're in a relationship with. Security, we did briefly mention this, but preparing for the future, is very concerning. And the previous generation to mine, all the men who were predominantly the breadwinners in those days, would head out into the world and get money, and that was the basis of it. And once they got to the point that they were retiring, there was no much point for them to be alive, and so they died. And fortunately, that tradition is changing and shifting, and the way we actually view those sorts of roles and so on is moving on. But when we talk about living for another 100 years or longer, 150 years, the concerns can really rise up to the surface. And as I say, it's the financial, emotional, and physical security are greatly important. So, purpose. As I mentioned, I think that purpose probably is the number one thing that needs to be reviewed in the whole coaching process. So, and how are we going to get actually in touch with our purpose? What is the purpose? Now, when I ask this question of clients, and I say, well, what's your drivers? What are your big drivers? They might say, oh, my kids, or my wife or my husband. And then they might say, well, I'm here on the planet to have a wonderful business, or to be a great church leader, or things of that nature. But you start asking them more questions about that and drilling down a bit further, and you realize that that's pretty shallow. Those aren't really very strong, powerful, purpose-related reasons for them to be wanting to have a very long life. And so what we need to do is actually work through very, very carefully the whole process of actually finding out exactly what the path is. So your purpose generally won't be a destination. So people normally think about their purpose as being an end goal. But more than anything, it's actually another good friend who's on this call tonight, mentioned to me when I was talking to him about it, he said, oh, it's the business of living a good life and living life well. And that's the path. So it's actually the matter of being on the path. And when we consider that we are mainly about being on a path and being on a journey, and for us to actually journey well, then we begin to be far happier in here and far more far better fit between our what we're doing in life and how we're thinking and feeling, and what that real intention, the underlying intention is for us. So staying young. One of the things that many people on the call, and I'm sure you may well be asking yourself, well, is why would I deserve to live to be such an old age? How is that reasonable? There's already overpopulation. By the time I'm 70 or 80 or 90 or whatever the number is that you're thinking of, I've run the course, I've done the job. I don't deserve to be carrying on any longer. And really what we're talking about is that there's a prevailing consciousness of degeneration and death. So morbidity and mortality, as they scientifically describe it. So that this is the prevailing consciousness. A very interesting thing to think about is that everything in there is actually around the expectation that you are going to run down, you're going to wear out, and then you're going to die. So the obvious opposite to that is the consciousness of continuous regeneration. Curiously, both are actually possible. So from a biological perspective, both are possible. And there's many examples within the operation of a human body, and there's countless experiments that have been done where the ways that you actually measure aging within a person's body have been either stopped or turned backwards. And there are scientific studies that I've seen which show evidence of this aging, the actual age of the aspects of the body, the cell and whatnot, having been turned back by as many as 10 years. And of course, they're really only just beginning this process. So, the question then comes, which do you choose? Do you choose the latter or the former? Very, very interesting question. And, I mentioned earlier about this idea of could you opt out? And, the obvious counter to that is that, whilst you can't take a pill to end your life, you're not allowed to do that. As much as I was close to doing that when I was, in the depths of my depression, I wasn't safe around knives, that's for sure. And, but nonetheless, in broad terms, it's just not the done thing to be taking your life. But whether you can actually choose to, believe the idea of continuous regeneration, which is the idea of staying young. Well, it's really renewal as opposed to staying young. So I'm not talking about holding on to youth, we're talking about continuous renewal. So I've developed this webinar series, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about them. And I was urged to put a dollar value on this by one of my coaches, and so I am saying that we've got a value here of $550 when we go through this webinar series, and we'll explore each pillar in depth one at a time. And obviously what we'll do is we'll bring in some guests who are thought leaders in each pillar, and what we'll do is we'll also address exactly how this coaching can be developed. And along with that, we've got some tools. So I'll run some special tools in there. I've got the first part of one of the tools we've got a video of, which we're going to show in a few minutes. But in each webinar, I'll actually give you a tool which you can take away and you can use right there and then, which will help you immeasurably on your path towards immortality. And included in that would be a session with me where we would run through all the strategies involved in actually getting to the point where you have a very long and very healthy life. So this is the idea of immortality. And so that's what we'll do. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a look at the technique that I promised that I would show you. And it's called Marmite or Marmalade. And so we'll play the video, and I'll talk a little bit after that. So enjoy this video. Okay, so that's the Marmite or marmalade, and I hope that that all makes sense to you. So clearly, as I was mentioning there earlier, I'm not advocating eating bread or Marmite or marmalade. I'm not advocating any of those things. All I was doing was identifying that I was very partial to eating toast for breakfast, toast and tea and that kind of thing. And I would traditionally put bread on it, and it just so happened that there was a jar of marmalade and there was a jar of Marmite in the kitchen at the time when I started actually doing this exploration. And so, as mentioned, what we're going to do is we're going to extend that technique out so that the whole intuitive eating process can actually be fully developed. And I'm quite sure that you will find that that's very, very useful to go from the place of just actually asking a simple question. So the question might be, would I, for example, in that example, I might routinely eat eggs for breakfast, or some other days I might eat crumpets. So you just say crumpets or eggs, quiet, and then wait. The answer will come through, particularly if you're focusing on the small intestines. The answer will come through directly, and I'll help you with that. So like you're going to need some assistance with that. We're going to finish up now because we're running over time. I've got a little technique here, which is a basic technique, which is delivered by the Body Talk Association. Dr. John Valtime developed the cortices technique, and it is without any question the #1 way of actually beginning to get balance within yourself. And I count this as being one of the main techniques that actually helped me to overcome my depression, to really become, to get out of it. This video was made about 18 months ago, but over a year ago, and you can see how much weight I've lost. So when I started doing this healthy weight program and really working on this this whole business of the consciousness of healthy weight, I lost 20 kilos, and I've done it without changing my diet or my exercise one little bit. But anyway, and you can see in this photograph right in front of you now, just an idea of how much more weight I was actually carrying at that time. So thank you so much for watching this. Look out for your emails. I'll be sending information on the upcoming webinars. I've got lots of other free content which I'm going to be sending out as well. And keep the dialogue up. Hope to hear from you. So thanks very much. So here's the cortices.